Okay, good morning everyone, thanks for waiting. I'd just like to welcome you to the next in our BCO series, Inspirational Leaders. My name is Louis Arrin and I sit on the BCO NextGen committee in London. I also work for U+I, where I'm a senior development manager, and I'm joined today by Richard Upton, who's our chief executive and co-founder, who has kindly, perhaps foolishly, agreed to be interviewed by me. Before we start with questions for Richard, I just want to kick off with a bit of housekeeping. You can see us, we can't see you. At the moment, we're gazing into a blue abyss. I think there's a Nietzsche quote in there somewhere. If you do want to ask any questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. The interview will last for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes at the end to answer some of those audience questions. So look, that's quite enough from me. The person you're obviously here to listen to is Richard. He is the driving force behind the strategic direction of U+I, whose vision is to create huge, long-lasting social and economic change for communities and sustainable value for shareholders. Richard is a creative entrepreneur and patron of the arts, who is passionate about quality of place, architecture, heritage, and provenance. A keen proponent of sensitive regeneration, in 2014, he fought and co-funded the campaign to save Smithfield Market in London from demolition. In 2018, the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport appointed Richard as Commissioner for Historic England. Richard co-founded Cathedral Group in 1998 and nurtured the company to become a market leader in public-private partnership developments, building a pipeline of over £2 billion. In May 2014, Cathedral merged with Development Securities, which ultimately became U+I in November 2015. U+I is a FTSE listed public company with a development pipeline of, I think, it's always changing, 10.5 billion. So, Richard, thanks for joining.
Yeah, you're welcome.
To kick things off, can you set the scene? Where did it all begin? Home, childhood, early career, launching your own business?
Well, it began in Mile End in Stepney. So I was born in the East End of London, and my father was a policeman, my parents divorced, and that left us without a place to live. And I was reflecting on this morning, actually. The welfare state at that point was great because the City of London Police gave us a flat above Bishopsgate Police Station to live for a period of time, and then they gave us a police house down in Lee, backing onto the South Circular in South London, in a age when key worker accommodation was supporting people. So I'm very grateful for that, I guess, with hindsight. Went to a very large comprehensive school in Eltham called Crown Woods, famous, I think, or infamous only for teaching the killers of Stephen Lawrence. But one of the best things that happened to that it was knocked down, I think, that school. And I'll come back to Crown Woods and Eltham later. My saving grace was the Air Cadets. Taught me some discipline and gave me some focus. I enjoyed flying, and my plan was to become a pilot. And I was lucky enough to get a scholarship with the RAF, and they taught me how to fly when I was still in sixth form, the first year of sixth form. Then I spent a summer at RAF Field and RAF looking at a big hangar and doing very little, and I thought, on reflection after that, I couldn't sign up for 12 years. I wouldn't make the grade. I didn't think I'd stick it out and be disciplined enough in the RAF. So I was then sitting at a swimming gala in Swanley with Steve Cochrane, who was a fighter pilot. And I said to him, look, I don't think I'm going to make the grade. I don't think I'm going to make a pilot. What am I going to do? And he had a careers office that was open in his school, and he knew the options. And he said, well, what do you love? And I said, well, I love design and technology, which they had at my school, and I was lucky for that. And I like designing things and making things and buildings and architecture. But I knew I needed to make some money. There wasn't much money at home, and I wanted to be independent. So he said, well, look, I also know you're a bit of a control freak, Richard, so you need to be the commissioner, not the architect. You need to create the job rather than wait for the job.
He was right.
You'll be too impatient. Yeah. So he said, study property development. And I was 17, and I said, what's property development? And he said, well, you're the commissioner. You know, you create things, and if you get it right, you can do very well, and if you don't, less so. So he said Reading's the best place to go. I needed to do an extra A-level to make it. I was only doing 2 in my first year. Did an extra A-level, scraped into Reading, and to be honest with you, I was out of my depth for the first year. I struggled a bit, and I guess again on reflection, being out of my depth has been a consistent theme for 53 years, and just taking the opportunities that come to me. So I went to Reading, came out in 1988, majored on urban design and the regeneration syllabus, and like that, came out, offered lots of jobs like everybody in 1988. The market was strong, graduate trainee scheme or another graduate training scheme. And I thought, I don't really want a graduate training scheme, I want to get stuck in. And there was a job as a land buyer with McInerney Homes, largest house builder in Ireland at the time, and had a UK subsidiary that did commercial and residential. And they threw a phone that size and an Escort 1.6 at me and said, go and buy some land. And I thought, this sounds like a great job. A couple of years passed, bought some land, learned land buying skills and talking with people, enjoyed that. And 3 or 4 land buyers became one. The market collapsed at the back end of the 80s. McInerney had trouble and retrenched back to Dublin. And I was trying to sell land. We had a land bank of 30 or 40 million, and there were no buyers. So I spent my time coming up with other ideas and went back, actually, which is a consistent theme, to places that I knew well. So I went back to Eltham because I saw there was a planning application by a polytechnic for student accommodation, and started to get under the skin of student accommodation and how that could work. We had a big construction team at McInerney. The receiver came in. My partners, Barry Bennett and Killian Hurley, who now owns Mount Anvil, very successful house builder now. We set up Mount Anvil on the 2nd of September 1991. And I was playing with this student deal down in South London. I thought we could make it self-financing and create a project. And Killian, I remember taking the project into him. It was sort of 2,000 bedrooms in total, but the first phase was 654. Killian said, no, we're just going to work out things for the receiver, don't do that. But I ignored him and continued working on the project. Got a mentor in the Vice Chancellor, John McWilliam, who moved his team aside and let me run the project, and learned quite a bit about student accommodation in the late 80s, early 90s, and pulled it off. And Mount Anvil was 10 or 15 people, had £2 of share capital, and we pulled off a £10 million deal, and that really was the genesis of Mount Anvil.
And how many student homes did you go on to develop with Mount Anvil? Yeah, and there's a consistent theme there, because in the early 90s, student accommodation just wasn't really understood. Universities or polys were run by academics. They didn't make any money. The yields were double digit. Participation rate in higher education was 14% in the late 80s, and it went to 33% in the mid 90s. So as polys became universities, the massive growth in participation saw a massive opportunity for developers, really. Polys and universities could develop on metropolitan open land so that they could create value from low value land. So you could use that to create a business model. And Mount Anvil went on to build over 5,200 student bedrooms in the next 12 years. Selling them to housing associations who wanted the management contract. We were the main contractor and put the deals together for a stronger margin than a construction margin, and applied that same sort of demographic transition and policy shift to another area of housing, and that was social housing, which 1988 Housing Act empowered, emboldened housing associations. Both universities and housing associations didn't have the resource to create their real estate, and that was the gap in the market that we spotted. So it sounds like with student housing and with social housing, you were early pioneers, fair to say, and spotting the gap in the market. Is that something that's been consistent throughout your career? Yeah, both spotting the gap in the market and then going back to apply it in a place where you have
perhaps greater knowledge. So the first student deal we did was in Eltham, it was opposite my school. The first social housing package deal we did, buying land and then creating the completed product for what are now called registered providers, was in Plumstead, was in Greenwich, and we grew organically because we could manage the planning risk, the people risk, and then it went further, and we developed as Mount Anville grew to about 100 people in the 90s. I was constantly looking at the horizon for what else we could do. Saw there was a massive change in the provision of primary healthcare. Government policy wanted to save the welfare state, secondary healthcare costs, and increase the sort of quality of primary healthcare facilities. And again, a misunderstood covenant, 9,000 GP surgeries across the country at the time, some of them above shops in tatty little buildings. So we created a company called Cathedral Healthcare to develop doctor's surgeries, and created a company called Cathedral, which had a view that mixed use, purpose-driven regeneration was an interesting market, because most developers weren't interested in that, and most public sector bodies who own more land than any other singular owner, they didn't trust the property industry. So again, what came through as a sort of pioneering spirit in student accommodation and social housing developed into sibling businesses of Cathedral and Cathedral Healthcare. And then we went on to build 13 doctor's surgeries all over the country, and we sold that portfolio and did very well to Harry Hyman from Primary Healthcare Properties in 2005. I sold out my interest in Mount Anville, where I became a third shareholder in 2002, and then took Cathedral and Cathedral Healthcare with Barry Bennett and grew both of those businesses.
And PHP is largest provider of healthcare facilities?
Yeah, I mean, there's a consistent theme here as well. Wish I hadn't sold them now. I mean, we did very well. We put the doctor's surgeries together at 8 or 9%. We sold them for around 5% at the time. The student accommodation, the 5,000 student bedrooms we built, if we kept them, the yields would have hardened, and maybe I wouldn't be sitting here, but each of those things was quite prescient in its way. Cathedral, after the sale of Cathedral Healthcare, became my baby, and we started doing some really interesting things in partnership with the public sector in the early 2000s, and won the project to deliver the first fire station that had been ever funded by way of partnership rather than PFI, so it was a free good. And what was pleasing there, I remember Cathedral was only 3 people, and we went in to pitch for this project of a couple of 100 flats and a fire station in Canary Wharf. And Tony Pidgley was walking out of the pitching room, and so we managed to beat the great Berkeley Holmes and Mr. Pidgley to one of our first partnership projects, and delivered a fire station, a beautiful one, on the Isle of Dogs. And that was, you know, from there Cathedral grew and continued to grow, very purpose-driven, very thoughtful, societal, exactly what public sector partners want to see, and isn't it, you know, is a joy to deliver. And fought our way through the financial crisis. We were pretty lowly leveraged, which was useful. So we had a large land bank with very low debt because there were partnership projects, and that's when I met Matthew Weiner. I needed to buy larger sites and more sites, and needed a balance sheet for that. Matthew at Development Securities was looking for good joint venture partners, and we bought 3 sites. We bought a sweetener refinery in Greenwich, Morden Wolf, bought the old vinyl factory, what became the old vinyl factory, which you've been working on very successfully, Louis, and another project in Greenwich called Greenwich Movement. So we, as Cathedral, borrowed their balance sheet, and they were looking to get into more mixed use regeneration, and so that's where that, you know, marriage started.
So there's a bit of a consistent theme here. You know, spotting gaps in the market, whether it's student housing, social housing, healthcare, mixed use regeneration, and in terms of skills that have equipped you to succeed, the skills that you treasure. Obviously, there's a bit of prophetic ability there, trying to work out what's going to happen. I don't know how intentional it was. It sounds like it was, if there's a bit of a consistent theme. But what other skills do you think have equipped you to succeed?
Yeah, and being curious is probably, I read a lot and don't look at silos of activity. So I didn't look at student accommodation or social housing. I'm looking at demographic shift. I'm interested in, societal issues. And if you're interested in that, you can start to look for trends. Always read the stuff that Future Laboratory put out, futurologists as they called themselves, found that sort of stuff fascinating. So being curious is key. Tenacity of course, and incredible resilience. Talking to somebody about this recently, Louis, the resilience is an absolute key factor in success in property. Sometimes you'll be buffeted by things much bigger than you, and you need to put your head down, act with integrity, and drive through. And of course, you grow in terms of resilience with adversity and some of the tough moments that you have and the challenges you set yourself. So I think resilience is key. Being local, property is a very local thing by definition. So when I had a sort of a global idea or a big idea, I've consistently gone back to apply it with local understanding, and that helps grow, a much bigger idea in a risk mitigated way. So I think, thinking big and acting local has served me quite well. And then you can grow organically from an area that you know well, and you can manage the planning risk, you can manage the delivery risk. And after 10 or 20 years of working in Greenwich, as we have, and we're still working in Greenwich, you're well known, and if you act with integrity and you deliver great things, then you're respected, and you can manage risk again an awful lot better. So I think that's important.
Which partly explains why I hear you sometimes say the best deals are under your nose, because they're local. Very
often when we're sort of sitting in new business meetings, it's the romance of somewhere else or another place. The grass is greener. Typically, it's the stale thing by your feet that others have passed that you've seen 5 or 6 times. That's almost entirely where the greatest deals are that we found. The Modern Wolf was a sweetener refinery that was brownfield for, I must have driven past it 25,000 times, queuing up in the Blackwall Tunnel. And there it was, it popped up, it was stale, and it was a great deal. And again, thinking big and acting local was very useful.
Look, we've spoken about the future, perhaps even predicting it. It would be remiss of me, given that we're conducting this interview on behalf of the BCO, not to ask about the office market. What do you see as its future? What's your honest opinion?
Yeah, look, others on this webinar will know this much more than I do. As the BCO webinar is much discussed, much agonized, and who knows, but look, home working has got to be here to stay. People are starting to price their commute at a personal level, and do I need to commit that amount of time to travel? Can I be more inefficient? So that clearly is going to have some effect and some structural effect long term. I don't agree with a sense that a knee-jerk reaction, effectively, that the office is dead or dying. That might be a two-way thing in terms of the office. Of course, the employee is thinking, well, how can I be more efficient with my time and have a better balance? Would that be more productive? And also get what I need from collaboration in the office. The employer might be thinking, again, structurally, that I don't need to pay somebody a London waiting, or like Mark Zuckerberg, who gave a waiting for people that were near the San Francisco office, and is suggesting that everybody can work from home and that waiting will go. Maybe there's some strong reasons why employers will seek to manage their costs through a shift towards home working or regional offices rather than more expensive cities. So that may play out. I think it's a wider seismic shift accelerated by COVID, almost certainly, that it's not just the future of the office, it's the future of the town centre, it's the future of the high street. And I would guess that those trends of rapid change have accelerated massively, and that will play out in a very interesting way in the next 5 or 10 years, where we're used to getting everything we need in here is algorithms mapping your every thought And yet you walk into a high street and it's a bit illiquid, it's a bit dead. It doesn't really know how to feed off of your innermost needs. So experiences in programming in the office, experiences in the high street, we're social animals that want more and more experiences. So I think there's the potential for the office to be a stage set for collaboration and, you know, active working, and the high streets to do the same. And perhaps, you know, the best degrees to do in the future will be hospitality and drama, and, you know, anything that creates an experience with property.
Yeah, let's just hope technology doesn't make it too Orwellian.
Yes. Well, I think actually it's interesting. Innovation is key as well. We've got an economic productivity crisis. So government policy is waking up to that, certainly post-Brexit. And so the need for innovation and economic productivity, we're down the lowest end of the table of economic productivity in this country, and we have been for decades. And so a doubling down of that post-Brexit, post-COVID, and a focus on innovation and what creates the most productivity per square foot of a new office. And as you know, Louis, we've opened an innovation hub in Brighton, and things like that are probably the future of the office, where you've got phone booths, you've got recording studios, you've got 3D printers, you've got programmed pitching and marketing skills going in there. You've got an aspirational bar, you can see the sea down in Brighton. It's a high energy, flexible space that also delivers the sorts of collaboration that society needs. So there will be a shift to more of that, I would hope.
Yeah, so that's more of the plus X business that Richard's talking about there. So look, I want to shift focus a little bit now and talk about art and heritage. I know it's important to you, and I know you feel maybe the answer to this question is obvious, but why is it so important to you, and why is it so important in creating great places?
Yeah, and great places is, you know, placemaking is a silly term. I think it's just again about the experience in a physical environment. The art for me, as you know, but others might not, you know, is art and heritage are probably king and queen of placemaking in my view. Art is so important, and we've been delivering public art on most of our projects, and pop-up activity and worthwhile activity that engages culture in place, you know, for decades now. It's almost a given. It's a sort of spice that makes the recipe sing. As you know, Louis, down in Bromley, we finished a sort of suburban scheme, densification scheme, a lovely scheme, a beautiful architecture, and I've put a sculpture by Stephen Gregory of a sort of faceless elephant on a tricycle. And the traffic stops in Westmoreland Road at that part of Bromley, and you look and you see this beautiful architecture and all of our CGIs and the things we'd be proud of as property developers, but you won't as a kid, and you probably won't as a curious adult. You'll see the sculpture and you'll be intrigued by it, and it will ground you to that place, and the kids will have some joy, and that might encourage them to go to the cinema that we built, who knows. But the sense of engagement with place, a conversation. I'm sure some people will say, what's that silly elephant doing on a tricycle? But at least they've had a conversation with their partner. There can be a sense of pride, a sense of belonging, and the belonging part that can be really enhanced with great public art. You know, it's a soul thing. We all want to belong somewhere, and I think art and culture, you know, have one of the strongest gifts, you know, when we're considering placemaking.
And you're obviously a Commissioner of Historic England, heritage as well. You know, often we look to retain that in our developments. You know, personally, I think that's the right thing to do. I was a history student, but could you just elaborate a bit more on that and why heritage and history and culture is important to you?
Yeah, I put it the wrong way around. I think heritage is the king and art might be the queen of placemaking. Why heritage is the king? Again, it's about a sense of being grounded and the narrative of a place. All too often cookie cutter approaches to regeneration and might have a beautiful master plan, excellent architecture, but forgets the sense of place and the stories and the history. As you know, in the old vinyl factory, that rich heritage of music and innovation and all of those sorts of things is embodied in the bricks. It's embodied in the public realm. It's there. Of course, as social animals, we want identity. You can get identity from place. You can get a sense of belonging. That's not entirely altruistic. It means you go back and you enjoy the place. There's a reason why pret-a-manger shops have brick walls, faux brick walls. There's a sense of authenticity. And I think that people are pretty astute and engaged. So heritage, I think, can deliver all of that and more. The sort of the big heritage assets obviously attract, what is it, 200 million visitors a year. Wearing my commissioner's hat, I can tell you that heritage assets generate over 30 billion for the UK economy. But then when you're working with the old Siemens factory down in Chiltern, and you've got a mixture of old and new, you've got 250 acres of an opportunity area with no heritage assets. So it's really, really important for that sense of place to retain and work with what's there. Many places can be sort of all things to all people and do a pretty good job, but they might be special, nothing special. To anyone.
So incorporating that into your development isn't just the right thing to do. It's not just altruism, it also is commercially the right thing to do.
Better sense of place. And King's Cross is an oft-used example, but I was walking through there the other day, and it's the inspiration for public realm, the industrial grade benches that are made reflecting on the old sort of coal infrastructure and everything else. Coal Drops Yard, of course. An inspiration for Heatherwick to go mad with a roof. So the great ambition of Victorian engineers comes alive, can feed the great ambition of Thomas Heatherwick, which can feed the great ambitions of Google, who are moving in. Each of these touch points might give energy to a particular reason to be in a place. So, and of course, the by no means least, the embedded carbon. Why throw something away that's perfectly good? Our principle here at U+I, as you know, would be to try and keep everything and work with it and have a layer of architecture and bring out the stories, as we're doing in Mayfield. We're discovering bits of old Victorian relics, and we're quickly remodeling the park that we're building there to make delicate, not forced reference to the huge ambition of Thomas Hoyle, the printmaker, or George Porton, who was very bothered about the welfare of workers and built a swimming pool and a laundry. And if you think, all of that energy exists in the soil, don't throw it away. It's inspirational. It's not just about the branding of place and the name. It's about soul, authenticity, belonging, and each of those things are going to drive footfall and make a place more sustainable and more resilient.
So look, just to close, bringing things back to U+I, the team. We, like others, have had a tough 12 months. COVID's beaten us up. How do you keep yourself and your team motivated?
I'm lucky. I'm a self-starter, but I live in the countryside, and so I have the benefit of nature, which is probably the biggest tonic there is if you're feeling a little damaged or isolated. To go for a walk in some fields is a huge privilege. Look, I think our immediate reaction, like many I've heard, was really good. It was really powerful. The technology work, that was a surprise, and we did very well there. Really task focused, as you know, doubled down on the projects and how we coordinate them as a group. We're lucky here, as you know, we wake up with a purpose. We want to make great places, and so hopefully it's not just work. We want to do something that's compelling. So that can lift, but the first lockdown had the benefit of some sunshine and a nice Easter, and that rolled into a novelty of working from home in summer.
And some pretty radical haircuts live on Zoom, I remember.
Some radical haircuts. We had a laugh a bit on Friday afternoons on a social. I got a friend who's a DJ, you know, we made music mixes with inspirational quotes. So we could all listen to the same music, and there's a connection in music. That went a bit stale, of course, in the third lockdown. I think you never knew when things were going to end, and I think the issues of mental health and well-being have become quite prevalent, and I think we could have done more, but we've been doing sleep clinics and various other things with George and doubling down, and I think that awareness that people have very different responses to the issues that we've been through, so there's no one size fits all response to looking after your team. There's some very individual issues that you need to be very thoughtful about if you care for your team, and we've tried. We could have done better, and we'll continue to do better.
Great, thank you. So look, I'm going to turn now to some audience questions. Just a reminder for everyone tuning in, if you do have a question, just put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I will put it to Richard. So the first one here, Richard, says, you have had a remarkable career, suck up. What would you have done differently?
Look, quite a few things really, albeit we set up Mount Temple when I was 23 and Cathedral when I was 31. I honestly thought I should have moved quicker, used my 20s, taken more risk, going about key skills. I never really had a fear of failure, which is, I'm privileged and I feel lucky for that. But I thought we could have moved quicker. We certainly should have kept the doctor's surgeries for maybe a few more years, because they could have amortized by now, and the student accommodation the same. So we might have sold too early. We certainly spotted some trends, and we continue to do that with the Innovation Lab at Plus X and various other good ideas. We need to look at what's the maturity of some of those good ideas. You put so much energy into pioneer something that being appropriately capitalized for some of those ideas at the right time might give you a better dividend to become a sectoral leader in those things. So could have probably held on a little more. I had children relatively late. I had my son at 40, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, but I would have preferred being slightly younger and not in the middle of all this stuff that we're in now. As they're 10, that's just a personal level, getting your work-life balance right and getting your timing right. I mean, who knows what's, there's no right or wrong in that, but perhaps we could have started breeding a little early.
Okay, thanks. I'll turn to the next one. Here's someone you'll recognise, Ben Cartwright. Richard, you are obviously hugely successful, another sucker, but also very family oriented. How have you balanced your work-family life over the years as both have grown successfully? I think you just touched on that.
Well, Ben, as a new father, which I know that you are, you must be thinking about this one and the years ahead quite carefully. Look, you're not going to get any answers from me, Ben, that are correct anyway. Speak to Ros, my wife. Have I got it right? Look, I've tried to. I'm a bit little binary. I took a sabbatical 2 years ago, which I'd always planned to have a year out, because I think it would give me a clean perspective. When I sold Mount Anvil, I went with my wife Ros through Burma, Laos, and Cambodia for 3 months, and we went where the backpackers didn't, because we had a couple of quid in our wallet, and we went exploring. And Ros is a journalist, so we were filming things in difficult places, and that was fantastic, and that gave me a real boost. So that's family when it was just Ros and I. And with children aged what were they, 8 and 10, I took the decision to take a sabbatical. It was about 5 months, went through South America with the family, which again you couldn't do now probably for the next few years, so deep into the Amazon. So I think it's been incredibly imbalanced, Ben, but when we've had time together, we've had shared memories, and we've gone, you know, and had fantastic adventures together. And that's how I tried to balance things.
Okay, let's move on to another one from an anonymous attendee. How have you dealt with adversity throughout your career, specifically any setbacks or failures that you may have had?
Sure. There's been lots of moments. I remember actually the first mentor, John McWilliam, the Vice Chancellor of what was Thames Poly. He's actually the Craig McWilliam, who was the Chief Executive of Grosvenor's father. He was a mentor for me. We tried to get planning consent for that student village, and I think on the third deferral after coming out of the town hall in Woolwich, and I put so much work into that, and it was the make or break in a number of ways for Mount Amble. He put his arm around me and said, "We'll get it next time. Dig deep, dig deep." And he just, I think the phrase "dig deep," which is a slightly annoying phrase, but I mention it to my wife, we need to dig deep, is a very relevant thing. You have to find another level of energy from inside. And during the financial crisis, Barry, my partner, had retired. All of the assets or liabilities were to my account. We were managing cash very carefully in 2008-9, and I, for the first time in my life, took a counsellor. I was taking on, you know, was effectively drawing out the salaries for my team from my own bank account to make sure everything was okay, not taking a salary for 2 or 3 years to make sure things were all right. And I met this lady called Fiona Hindle, who I talked to, and that's not something I'd ever done before. And that allowed me to deal with things in quite a really positive way. She told me that I needed time on my own, that I needed to visualize things, I need to help people. 5 or 6 key things that are real energy systems, like charging my battery. And it worked. I knew most of them, but I didn't apply it. And from there, I remember, rather than keeping all of the stress inside, I created a prize to, it's called the Black Horse Prize. It was a big black horse that sat in the church at Cathedral. And I told all of my team, you know, the key issues that we're facing as a business, and gave some motivation for encouraging them to help me and help the business. So we shared the problem, and that was really cathartic.
And we still have the Black Horse.
We still have the Black Horse. We still have the Black Horse Prize. So it's opening up, empowering your team really to support me as the business owner or the leader at that time, and it was tremendously effective, both at a team camaraderie level and at a business success level. We powered out of the recession very successfully at Cathedral.
I love this question. Richard, what would you do if you were Mayor of London?
Oh man, having spent about 20 minutes going through the back streets of the South Bank the other day, the recent sort of neighbourhood centres which stop you driving through as a taxi driver through London look to be a little bit of a struggle. What would I do? I would try and encourage we're hollowing out I'm a Londoner, as I told you, Mile End. We're hollowing out our city. It's becoming incredibly unaffordable. You know, I was able to buy my first house on 3 times my salary in London and get on a housing ladder and get that equity. And I wasn't earning particularly much at the time, but it was on the edge of Greenwich, and I did well. And now you're at 7, 8, 9, 10 times salary. I think one needs to embrace a need to make London affordable, to have proper housing grant to make that happen. I think the Mayor of London planning department should embrace new types of product that we're missing support for the squeezed middle. We do okay for the most needy, and we make amazing places that cost an awful lot of money for the very rich. But the squeezed middle, the engine room of our city perhaps, are being left behind. And I think that will make London a considerably lesser place if that continues. So that's a housing crisis in this capital. We just can't afford it. That cannot carry on.
Next question. Very inspiring conversation. Thank you. Working with companies such as you and I is a great opportunity for architects and urban designers. I promise you we didn't plant this question. Do you have any advice to give to architects to engage and attract companies like yours?
Yeah, you'd be amazed at how many architects come in and do a pitch and give you lots of pictures of, you know, fancy houses or buildings, and there's 20 or 30 or 40 images of, or sketches or competition entries. One of the reasons why we won the fire station project in Canary Wharf all those years ago with no balance sheet against much better competition really was really simple, and the head of property at the fire brigade told me this after we won it. He said, you simply asked, instead of giving the presentation on how great you were and all the projects you've done, you said, what sort of fire station do you really want? And in those conversations, those iterative conversations, we learned that we could create a fire tower in the middle of a residential block, increase the density by a third, and make that work as a sculptural piece. And so it was only by engaging with the issues of the person that we're pitching to that we could create a superior response. So we gave him more density, more value, a better fire station, because we understood, well, at least we challenged the brief and made it a better brief for a regeneration project. And architects can often, it may be the way that they're taught, I don't know, and not all of them, by the way, might just give you a whole spin of things that they've done before, rather than try to understand what it is that makes us tick and what our problems are, and then present some solutions. And so that in a way is to understand your audience, and there may be value add for both architects and client in that approach. Simple stuff, but effective.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. How have you weighed up risks throughout your career?
That's a really good question. You asked about the sort of skill sets needed, I think, or at least those that I've learned. One is knowing your weaknesses, knowing your strengths, of course, knowing your weaknesses, and finding someone as a counterbalance for you. And measuring risk, of course, needs a few perspectives. I was very lucky. I only had one job interview other than the role for commissioner in my whole life. Each of these companies have grown. And that first interview with McInerney was Barry Bennett, who's still a board director here at U+I. And Barry would read odds, is incredibly thorough, and he's 10 or 12 years older than me, would put a choke chain around my young neck and let me run on a lead. And I very rarely felt it choke. And I'll come back with something half formed, and we'd shape it in terms of risk management and the business plan together, and then shape it again. He's probably on any psychometric the polar opposite from me. And learning how to converse, communicate, engage with someone who has strengths where you have weaknesses, and making that fit. It's very, very difficult to talk sometimes, very polar opposite people. That's key, I think. And being able to look at all perspectives, being able to challenge yourself, be challenged, and challenge in a really productive way is going to synthesize the answers to a much greater degree. So have a counterbalance.
Right, I'm going to pre-warn you, the next question is quite technical and lengthy, but it's been asked, so I'm going to ask it, by Jeff Taylor. Carbon footprint. I'm interested if Richard thinks that the town planning regime should be measured and evaluated for its carbon content. Long and expensive process, often political, public inquiries, appeals and all that, as it seems to me that measuring at the point of construction and going forward is a cop-out by the public sector and policymakers.
Cool. Look, I agree. Can I just say, I agree. What you're effectively saying is that the town planning process is inefficient and in itself unsustainable in the way that it approaches things, and the measurement of that and the blight. You know, if you've got like our a London Fire Brigade project. We're building again, hopefully, another fire station at U+I on the Albert Embankment. It's at a planning inquiry. That piece of property, 2.5 acres on the River Thames, has been empty for over 10 years, costing the London Fire Brigade hundreds of thousands of pounds every year. And the complexity of that planning process in all of its iterations is hugely wasteful, not just of the amount of paperwork required to go through inquiries and the meetings and all of those travel arrangements to do that, which is clearly inefficient, but empty, blighted land that the planning system isn't working in an increasingly politicized way is incredibly inefficient. We're on a small island. We've got to leverage a sensitive, spiritually sound, beautifully designed regeneration in an appropriate way from each of those sites. And whilst the missives at the white paper are let's streamline and improve the planning system, the reality is very different. We need to change that. I agree with you.
So look, there are a couple of more questions in there from anonymous attendees, but I think they've been answered during the course of the conversation. So I'm going to wrap up there. I hope you all found that as interesting as I did. Thank you for tuning in, and of course, thank you, Richard, for sharing your time. So that's the end of the session. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.